The consequences of violating court orders, from contempt to felonies. Violating a court order typically falls under the umbrella of contempt of court, which can be classified as civil or criminal, depending on the context and severity. The consequences vary, but are designed to uphold the authority of the judiciary and ensure compliance with the law. Civil contempt. This occurs when someone fails to comply with a court order, such as ignoring a restraining order, missing a child support payment, or refusing to produce documents in a lawsuit. The goal is remedial, to compel compliance. Penalties include fines, monetary penalties that can escalate daily until compliance is achieved. Compensatory payments, orders to pay the other party's legal fees or losses caused by the violation. Jail time. In extreme cases, courts may order incarceration until the individual complies. For example, failing to turn over assets in a bankruptcy case could lead to detention. Criminal contempt. This is more serious, involving willful defiance that undermines the court's authority, such as disrupting proceedings, threatening a judge, or repeatedly ignoring orders. Penalties include misdemeanor charges, fines up to $1,000 and jail time of up to 6 months in many jurisdictions. Felony charges. In rare cases, particularly if the violation involves violence or significant harm, e.g., violating a protective order leading to assault, felony charges can apply, carrying prison sentences of a year or more. Probation or community service. Courts may impose supervised release or mandatory service as an alternative or addition to fines and jail. Escalating consequences for repeat offenders. Persistent defiance can lead to harsher penalties. For instance, someone who repeatedly violates a restraining order may face escalating fines, longer jail terms, or felony charges if their actions cause harm. Courts take a dim view of those who thumb their nose at judicial authority. For the average person, you or me, these consequences are real and immediate. Miss a court-ordered payment? Expect wage garnishment or a lien on your property. Ignore a subpoena? You could be arrested. Defy a judge's direct order? You might find yourself in handcuffs, facing a judge who is not inclined to leniency. The system is designed to ensure compliance, and it typically does so effectively for ordinary citizens. The case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Supreme Court rebuke. A stark example of this disparity involves the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Salvadoran man living legally in Maryland with a work permit since 2019. On March 15, 2025, Abrego Garcia was detained by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and deported to El Salvador's notorious Terrorism Confinement Center, CCOT, despite a 2019 court order prohibiting his removal due to the risk of persecution by gangs. The Trump administration acknowledged this deportation as an administrative error, but alleged without evidence that Abrego Garcia was a member of the MS-13 gang, a claim his attorneys vehemently denied. On April 4, 2025, U.S. District Judge Paula Shinas ordered the Trump administration to facilitate and effectuate Abrego Garcia's return to the United States, citing the illegality of his deportation and the violation of his constitutional protections. The Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals upheld this order, and on April 10th, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously, 9-0, directed the administration to facilitate his release from Salvadoran custody and ensure his case is handled as it would have been absent the unlawful deportation. The court emphasized that the government must share details of its efforts to comply, though it stopped short of mandating Abrego Garcia's immediate return, citing deference to executive authority in foreign affairs. Despite this clear judicial directive, the Trump administration has resisted compliance. As of April 14, 2025, Justice Department lawyers argued that the Supreme Court's order only required removing domestic obstacles to Abrego Garcia's return, not actively securing his release from El Salvador. During a White House meeting with El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele, Trump and his advisors, including Stephen Miller and Attorney General Pam Bondi, doubled down, claiming the U.S. lacked authority to retrieve Abrego Garcia and misrepresenting the court's order. Bukele refused to release him, calling the request preposterous and labeling Abrego Garcia a terrorist. The administration has provided no meaningful updates on efforts to comply, flouting Judge Sinis's subsequent orders for daily progress reports. Trump's history of evading consequences. The Abrego Garcia case is not an isolated incident. Throughout his legal battles, Trump has faced accusations of ignoring court orders, delaying payments, and avoiding accountability, often without immediate consequences. For example, unpaid fines and restitutions. Trump has been ordered to pay significant fines in civil cases, such as the $464 million judgment, including interest, in a New York fraud case involving inflated asset valuations. While he posted a bond to appeal, delays in legal maneuvers have allowed him to postpone full payment. Similarly, in defamation cases brought by Jean Carroll, Trump was ordered to pay $88.3 million, but appeals and stays have deferred enforcement. Defiance of court orders. In addition to the Abrego Garcia case, Trump's administration has been accused of violating judicial orders in immigration matters. For instance, during his first term, courts found the administration in contempt for failing to fully comply with orders to reunite separated migrant families. Yet, no individual officials faced personal penalties. Contempt threats. Without follow-through. Judges have warned Trump of contempt in various cases, such as when he violated gag orders in his New York hush money trial by attacking witnesses and jurors. He was fined $10,000 but avoided jail despite prosecutors arguing for incarceration. Ordinary defendants facing similar violations often face swift detention. This pattern suggests a double standard. While Trump's legal team employs appeals, delays, and public rhetoric to mitigate consequences, ordinary citizens lack the resources, influence, or platform to similarly evade accountability. The symbol of justice. A blindfold that sees wealth. The statue of Lady Justice, adorned with her sword, scales, and blindfold, stands as an enduring symbol of fairness in our legal system. The blindfold represents impartiality, ensuring that justice is blind to status, race, or wealth. The scales weigh the evidence, balancing truth and fairness. The sword delivers swift and equal punishment to those who violate the law. Yet, this idealized image is a false perception, a myth we've been conditioned to accept. In practice, Lady Justice's blindfold is porous, her scales tip toward those with money and power, and her sword falls heaviest on everyone else. The promise of impartiality crumbles when wealth determines outcomes. For those like Donald Trump, the scales are padded with high-priced attorneys, political influence, and procedural delays. Fines, even in the hundreds of millions, become mere inconveniences, deferred through appeals or bonds. Court orders, like the one in the Abrego Garcia case, are sidestepped with legal gymnastics or outright defiance, with no immediate consequences. The sword of justice, jail, asset seizures, or swift penalties rarely touches those who can afford to evade it. For the rest of us, the story is different. The scales feel only the weight of our limited resources. A missed court payment or a violated order brings wage garnishment, arrest, or incarceration. The blindfold lifts to reveal a system that scrutinizes our inability to pay for top-tier representation or navigate complex legal maneuvers. The sword strikes quickly, cutting through our lives with fines we can't afford, jail time that disrupts families, or records that haunt our futures. Justice, it seems, is not blind. She sees the size of our bank accounts and measures accordingly. This disparity shatters the illusion of Lady Justice as a guardian of fairness. Instead, she appears as a gatekeeper, granting leniency to the powerful while wielding her sword against those who lack the means to tip her scales. The Abrego Garcia case, where a unanimous Supreme Court order is met with defiance yet no punishment, is a stark reminder. Money buys time, influence buys deference, and ordinary citizens bear the full brunt of a system that claims to be impartial but operates otherwise. Why the disparity? Power, politics, and privilege. Several factors contribute to this apparent inequity. Resources and legal firepower. Trump's wealth and access to top-tier legal counsel allow him to exploit procedural mechanisms, appeals, stays, and emergency motions that delay or dilute consequences. Most individuals cannot afford such representation, leaving them vulnerable to immediate penalties. Political influence. As a former president and current political figure, Trump wields significant public and institutional influence. His ability to frame legal battles as political persecution rallies supporters and pressures officials, potentially deterring aggressive enforcement. Ordinary citizens lack this leverage. Judicial deference. Courts often show restraint when dealing with executive actions, especially those involving foreign policy or national security, as seen in the Supreme Court's nuanced ruling in the Abrego-Garcia case. This deference can inadvertently shield high-profile figures from accountability. Systemic overload. The sheer volume of Trump's legal entanglements, over 90 criminal charges, multiple civil suits, and ongoing appeals, creates a backlog that delays resolution. For the average person, a single violation is typically resolved quickly, with immediate consequences. What happens to you or me? Contrast Trump's experience with what an ordinary person would face. If you or I violated a court order, say by ignoring a restraining order or failing to pay court-ordered restitution, the response would be swift, immediate enforcement. Sheriffs or federal marshals could arrest us for contempt. For example, violating a protective order might lead to an arrest warrant within days. Financial ruin. Unpaid fines or restitution could result in wage garnishment, bank account seizures, or property liens, disrupting our lives. Incarceration. Persistent defiance, such as refusing to comply with a judge's order to produce evidence, could land us in jail until we comply or face criminal charges. No deference. Courts rarely grant ordinary citizens the benefit of the doubt, especially in matters of national security or foreign affairs, as seen in Trump's case. For instance, if an average person were involved in a case like Abrego-Garcia's, say, by unlawfully detaining and deporting someone in violation of a court order, they could face civil contempt, fines, jail until compliance, criminal contempt, misdemeanor or felony charges, or even federal charges for kidnapping or civil rights violations. The Justice Department would likely pursue such a case aggressively, with little room for delay. A rule of law crisis? The Abrego-Garcia case, coupled with Trump's broader history of evading judicial consequences, underscores what some legal scholars call a rule of law crisis. As Georgetown University law professor Stephen Vladeck noted, the government's stance that it can disappear people to a foreign country with no due process and no responsibility sets a dangerous precedent. If the executive branch can defy a unanimous Supreme Court ruling without immediate repercussions, what prevents it from targeting anyone, citizen or non-citizen, with impunity? For ordinary Americans, this disparity breeds distrust in the legal system. Why should we face jail for missing a court date or failing to pay a fine when a former president can seemingly ignore a Supreme Court order? The answer lies in the interplay of power, privilege, and politics, a reality that challenges the principle of equal justice under the law. Moving forward, accountability or impunity? The Abrego-Garcia case remains unresolved, with Judge Sheena scheduling hearings to monitor the administration's compliance. Some, like Representative Hakeem Jeffries, have called for contempt citations against officials like the Secretaries of State and Homeland Security. Others advocate for stronger judicial enforcement, such as fines or detention for non-compliant officials. Yet, as of April 17, 2025, no concrete penalties have been imposed on Trump or his administration for this violation. For now, the lesson is clear. The consequences of violating court orders are severe for most, but for those with power and influence, the scales of justice tip differently. Lady Justice, with her blindfold lifted and scales unbalanced, reveals a system where wealth buys leniency and the sword spares the powerful. Until courts and lawmakers address this disparity through stricter enforcement, contempt proceedings, or legislative reforms, the promise of equal accountability remains elusive. For you and me, the message is stark. Defy a court order, and the full weight of the law will fall. For Donald Trump, it seems, the law is more negotiable, and Lady Justice's sword remains sheathed. By Scott Young, aka Synfamous Gamer,